He might actually be the most derivative one of all. I mean, Christ, the same house.
Maybe so. But you forgot the first rule of surviving a stab movie. Never answer the...
I'm bored.
Wait!
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking wham bang specials. We're talking, and I thought Dr. Elliot just wanted to put on a dress. And we're talking, are you going to pump me dry here or invite me in? And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking about the size of that cock in your pants.
Ooh, Liz really does get all the best lines in this movie, doesn't she?
She really does. I love this character. Everyone, we are discussing Brian De Palma's 1980 classic, Dress to Kill. Did we intentionally plan this so close after covering Psycho?
We kind of sort of did. I mean, we always knew we were going to cover Dress to Kill. We always knew it was going to be part of our erotic thriller month, which we're kicking off here. But we did shuffle this around. So originally this was going to close out the month, and then we moved it up.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Okay, well, happy Dress to Kill Day, everybody. But before we get too further into this, let's bring our guest who is waiting in the wings. Everyone, she is a trans, queer film historian and programmer based out of Austin, Texas. She's also the print, traffic, and special projects manager at the American Genre Film Archive. You may have also read her work in such publications as Hyperallergic, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. Please welcome Elizabeth Purchell.
Ooh.
Hey, I'm not that Liz. I'm the other Liz. I'm not Nancy Allen. Sorry.
Don't worry, we'll leave some good lines for you too.
Okay.
I will say, when Joe said Liz is really the best, I was like, Joe, we haven't introduced her yet.
Not scripted.
No, not at all. But yes, welcome to the show, Elizabeth. So, by all means, tell us everything you like about Dress to Kill.
Oh my God. Or you could just say, what's your relationship with the film?
I don't know. I have a weird relationship with this film for various reasons. I mean, I think it's one of Brian De Palma's best thrillers. It's one of his best flat out like horror films. But at the same time, like as like a trans film, it is like deeply, profoundly, misinformed.
Oh boy, 1980 has never felt so far away.
I mean, it's funny that y'all like asked me to be on an episode about this movie because I'm actually about to do a whole little mini series at the Alma Drafthouse in Austin, Texas, called Village of the Damned, New York 1980, which is looking at the 4 queer horror movies made in New York in 1980: Cruising, Dress to Kill, Windows, and what is truly the greatest horror film of them all, Can't Stop the Music, the Village People biopic where they all have girlfriends and they're straight.
Okay.
Oh my God, horrifying.
You sent me that list, and when I had originally read the list, I was like, I don't think that's a horror film, is it?
I mean, the greatest horror of all is the Village People are all straight and they have girlfriends.
Right.
That's like an alternative dimension.
Yeah, I don't know. Because Joe, you I feel like have a really close, well, is it a close relationship? I know you love this film. What is your story with this?
I do love this film. I can't remember the first time I saw it. I've not watched all of De Palma's films, and yes, folks, we will acknowledge that last week we said, oh, we've never covered a Brian De Palma film.
Right.
Lo and behold, of course, we had already covered Phantom of the Paradise, but that feels off-kilter for De Palma. This feels much more within his wheelhouse, so I think this is probably my favorite of his, although there's still a bunch of other, bangers in the mix.
Yeah, I think going through his filmography, I actually have a lot of De Palma blind spots. Like, I've never seen Blowout. I've never seen Body Heat. I've never seen Obsession. I actually came across Dress to Kill because the museum scene was shown in one of my film school classes. Like, just the scene. We didn't watch the whole movie. And so I sought it out after that to see it. Yeah, I really like this. I softened on it a little bit on this rewatch, but that's mostly purely from a narrative standpoint. I think this film has style for days. As Elizabeth said, I do think there's some really problematic things we will obviously be discussing, but I also kind of find it to be a kind of fascinating time capsule of, and maybe y'all can disagree with me, on public or some mentality on transgender people in 1980.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's a film that is so about transness that Brian De Palma feels the need to have like a Donahue interview with Nancy Hunt in the middle of the movie. So as to say, like, oh, see, trans people, if you haven't been watching TV, here's your 5-minute refresher on everything.
I mean, yeah, the funny thing is, I looked up some quotes from De Palma, and the most recent quote I can find is from 2016, which I'll go over when I go through the production. But it's almost like, though, he thought that putting that in there was, almost like an educational moment for anyone in the audience who wasn't familiar with the concept of transgender people, and also maybe kind of sort of excusing his portrayal of a transgender woman in this movie.
It's unusual, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's great because it makes me want to look up that Donahue episode with Nancy Hunt. But at the same time, it does kind of point out just how deeply strange his reading about what transness is. Because he's clearly looking, I mean, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but he's almost looking at it as like this Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing, and not
yes,
what it actually is.
Well, okay, here. So before we get too deep into it, like, because some of this will be in like how this film came to be and where he got the ideas from for this film. So to get into how this got made, most of this did come from the 2001 documentary that is included on Criterion's Blu-ray. They do have a lot of interviews with De Palma, with Nancy Allen, with Pino Donaggio from 2015, which was their Blu-ray release of this film. So I incorporated some of that, but a lot of it's from 2001. I was surprised that none of the transgender issues were really broached in this documentary. The only controversy that's really recorded here is the misogyny.
Yeah, I think because this is his famous trans film, but of course, accusations of misogyny have plagued his entire career. So when you think of De Palma, you typically think of his misogyny first, and then you think of the transphobia second.
And I mean, this film was protested by the National Organization for Women when it was first released. And it's interesting that, like you said, the thing that was protested was the violence against women and not necessarily the transgender killer. Although the trans killer was kind of mentioned like in leaflets that were like handed out at protests.
Right.
But that was not like the focus. It was not like Cruising or Windows where the protests were like, this is going to set the gay community back 50 years, or this is going to cause gay people to be murdered in the streets, like it did, like Cruising did.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I know we're not discussing Cruising, but quick thought on that. Do you like Cruising?
I think Cruising's a masterpiece. I think it's William Friedkin's best film, so...
Ooh.
Well, okay, so Dressed to Kill got its start in the mind of writer-director Brian De Palma. He was fresh off The Fury in 1978 and Home Movies in 79. Funnily enough, I've never seen Home Movies. That was conceived as a hands-on training exercise for his film students. They were given the primary responsibilities of raising money, arranging the shooting schedule, and editing the film, all under De Palma's supervision. But that film also starred De Palma's then-wife, Nancy Allen, and Keith Gordon, who was in this film. Anyway, so De Palma had an idea to adapt Gerald Walker's 1970 novel, Cruising, but he couldn't get the rights to it, so he just stuck with the idea of Cruising and moved that over to a guy picking up a girl in an art gallery.
Yes, because historically, it's so easy to just move from gay cruising over to woman picking up man in art gallery.
I think maybe he was like, what would a straight version of Cruising look like?
Yeah.
His script for Cruising actually exists. I've seen it. It was sold like on an auction site, like a copy of it was sold on an auction site years ago. I wish I could read it. Because I mean, not to talk about Cruising, but that movie has such a fascinating like production history because Paul Morrissey was actually going to make it in like the early 70s with, I think, Jeff Bridges was going to play the killer, or he's going to play the killer or he's going to play the cop. It was going to be Jeff Bridges and Paul Morrissey. And Jack DeRocho, Flawless Sabrina from the documentary The Queen, was going to be like the advisor from the gay community helping make the film.
Oh, that might have been good to have on set.
Yeah.
Right?
And then somehow it went to, I think it might have gone to Scorsese, and then it went to De Palma, and then it finally wound up with Friedkin. Like a decade later.
Well, and that's the thing, because I didn't realize how closely Cruising and Dressed to Kill were released. Cruising was February of 1980, and Dressed to Kill was July of 1980.
And I think Windows, which is the evil psychotic lesbian movie that was released, I think, in January of that year.
So 1980 was a real good year for the queer community, is what you're saying.
We
all
have
in New York.
progress to make.
Yeah.
All in New York.
And Can't Stop the Music was released in February, too. So.
Oh, my God. Well, so all these ideas are mulling around in De Palma's head, but here's the thing. So it was that Phil Donahue interview with Nancy Hunt that he saw, and he was like, what if I mix that in with my Cruising idea? And we'll do that. And apparently, and this is De Palma said at the time in 1980, there were a lot of interviews with transgender people airing on TV. And so I guess it was just kind of a hot topic amongst interviewers. But he became fascinated with the concept of being in the wrong body. And so, as you said, Elizabeth, like, it's like a Jekyll and Hyde thing. This led him to the idea of a psychotic man whose psychotic side came out every time he became aroused by a woman, thus becoming the whole premise of Dress to Kill. George Leto was De Palma's producer from the early days, ever since doing 1976's Obsession with him. And since then, of course, De Palma had done Carrie, The Fury, home movies. De Palma sent him the script and said, please read this immediately. Stop what you're doing. Read it now. So it took 2 hours. He read it and he was like, yeah, this is good.
I'm sure he had that laissez-faire response.
Exactly. He went to financier Samuel Z. Arkoff, who he knew as an admirer of De Palma's, and so they got a deal struck. Arkoff gave them $6 million to make the film and left them completely alone, so they had complete creative control while making this film. De Palma originally wanted Norwegian actress Liv Ullmann, best known for 1972's The Immigrants and the original Swedish miniseries Scenes from a Marriage, which was of course adapted from to an HBO miniseries with Jessica Chastain and Oscar Isaac in 2021. She declined because of the violence in the script. He also approached Jill Clayburgh, who was unavailable, and next sought out Angie Dickinson, who was coming off of a 4-year run on the TV series Policewoman. After reading the script, she turned it down, so De Palma asked her to read it again. After prying a little bit, he realized that she mainly objected to the shower scene, so he offered her a body double for the nude scenes, and she agreed to do it. The body double in question was 1977 Penthouse Pet of the Year model Victoria Lynn Johnson, although they tried to keep this a secret for a while, and it came out the same year, but it wasn't supposed to come out.
And interestingly enough, he was so intrigued by the way that this worked that he ends up making the movie Body Double 4 years later.
Which, one of his best movies, I think.
Yeah, it's a really good one too.
Well, and that was more of it wasn't a flop, but it wasn't a critical or commercial success, but I think it's been reappraised more recently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, guess we'll have to cover that soon. Sean Connery was offered the role of Robert Elliot, the Michael Caine character, and was enthusiastic about it, but declined because of previous commitments. He will, of course, go work with De Palma in The Untouchables in 1987. In the original version of the film, the son, Peter, the Keith Gordon character, was meant to be 10 years old, maybe 12 years old. I have both answers. But they couldn't find someone that young who could really do the part and make the film work. I also wonder if the idea of a 10-year-old working with a sex worker was giving people pause.
It was a different time.
Well, they cast Keith Gordon, whose only film credits at this time would have been Jaws 2, All That Jazz, and De Palma's own home movies. But it was Nancy Allen who recommended Gordon for the part after De Palma told her, oh, hey, I wrote this part for you, Nancy. I think they got divorced maybe 2 years after this movie came out. Principal photography took place between October of 79 and January of 1980. Shot primarily in New York City, although the art gallery scene was filmed at the Philadelphia Museum of Art because they couldn't get into any of the museums in New York City. They tried MoMA, the Met, and a couple of other things. No one would let them in.
I'm sure they all read the script and said, ooh, no.
2 versions of this film exist in North America. We have an R-rated theatrical version and an unrated version. If you watch this movie on streaming, I checked the Amazon stream, that is the R-rated version. Criterion obviously has the unrated, or actually X-rated cut, as it would have been at the time. It's not too different. The unrated version is about 30 seconds longer and shows more pubic hair and full lip in the shower scene. We have more blood in the elevator scene, including a close-up shot of the killer slitting Kate's throat, and more explicit dialogue from Liz during the scene that I quoted in the opening of this episode. We say bulge instead of cock in the R-rated cut of this film.
Which still works.
Yeah, I just feel like cock has that bite to it, you know?
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. It's what you would imagine someone who works in a sex industry would probably say.
Or normal. I mean, okay, getting personal. Do y'all say bulge when you're in mid-coitus, or do you say cock when you're mid-coitus?
My God, who's talking?
Well, I mean, you know Brian De Palma was straight because he didn't write it as basket, which was the gay version of that at the time. Which is the stupidest fucking word, and I never understood why gays loved that term so much.
I mean, it's like box too. I don't get calling something a box.
Yeah.
Dress to Kill premiered in Los Angeles and New York City on July 25th of 1980 and went on to gross $3.4 million its opening weekend in just under 600 theaters. It added 5 theaters its second weekend and improved upon its gross, earning $3.6 million. It went on to gross a total of about $32 million in the U.S. box office and was the 21st highest grossing film of 1980.
Yeah, so this was a really, really big film. It's important to note that because when we talk about these controversial queer quote-unquote classics, we've talked about the legacy. So the box office does factor into how many people actually saw this and therefore may have walked away with trans woman equals killer mentality.
Question for both of you. Do y'all think, though, that, obviously I'm not coming down on protests whatsoever, but do y'all think that the protests maybe added more attention to the film and thus convinced more people to go see it?
Perhaps. I mean, the thing to point out, too, I hate to keep bringing up these same two titles, but,
yeah,
it should be noted that, Cruising and Windows were probably protested even more heavily, and neither of those films did very well at all. I know Windows was basically a flop, and Cruising was not a big hit like they were hoping it was going to be. So it's interesting that this one, which is probably the most heterosexual oriented, is the one that's the big hit.
Yeah, I guess it's the safest content wise, I guess, which, oh god, that sounds weird to say about just this movie, but
well, I wonder if it's also that the protests were coming primarily from women compared to the queer community.
Yeah,
maybe. I mean,
you could easily look at these protesters and be like, oh, these crazy feminists, they're blowing it all out of proportion or whatever, but I can totally get that.
Smile more. Go back to the kitchen where you belong. That's probably what people were saying.
Well, it is 1980, right? So we're right on the cusp of the end of a certain wave of feminism, but then moving into conservative Reagan territory. So this is such a nebulous, weird, liminal time.
Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, critically though, we're looking at a pretty positive critical reception. We got 82% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 6.7 out of 10. 74 out of 100 on Metacritic, and Letterboxd users have given it a 7.2 out of 10. Reviews mainly praise the museum sequence, Pino Donaggio's score, while also noting that the film was an exercise in style, not narrative, as the whodunit aspect is easily solved. I don't remember if I called it the first time I saw it, because I can't remember if I knew about the legacy of the film. Because I feel like if you know the legacy of the film, you're kind of like, oh, well, yeah, you're going to know who the killer is going into it.
Well, I mean, my partner spoiled it for me before I ever saw it, so...
Bastard.
There were, of course, a lot of comparisons to Hitchcock's Psycho, something that De Palma was already used to. Obsession has many shades of Vertigo, for example, but to that he says, if you're going to be good, you're going to do Hitchcock because he's done it all and he's done it the best. So I almost admire his shamelessness in this regard.
I mean, it's interesting for me because I don't know if he had seen any of these films at the time because they were, in America, they didn't really have great releases. But this film to me feels like more of an Argento homage than anything else. It's like a classic Argento giallo, down to the fact that you can see the killer, within the first 15 minutes. There's a brief shot of the killer. There's the person who's the witness to the murder and then gets fingered for the crime and then has to figure out what they saw, what they actually saw when they saw, the murder happening.
Yeah, idiot police.
Yeah.
Also a lot more erotic than a Hitchcock film.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Also a lot more queer than a Hitchcock film.
Well, we've had surprising amounts of queerness with Hitchcock, but yeah, I mean, a lot of that is much more coded, whereas Argento often has actual queer characters.
But, I mean, not every review of the film was positive. John Simon of the National Review, after taking note of the 2-page advertisements full of superlatives in the New York Times, wrote, "What Dressed to Kill dispenses liberally, however, is sophomoric softcore pornography, vulgar manipulation of the emotions for mere sensation, salacious but inept dialogue that is a cross between comic strip Freudianism and sniggering double entendres, and a plotline so full of holes to be at best a dotted line."
Okay, that just sounds like a rave to me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're just selling me on this movie.
But all of that being said, Dressed to Kill led, as we've said many times, led to controversy and protests upon its release. So, in an interview with Nancy Allen, she said that it was getting protested before the film even came out. And I feel like we obviously, saw this with Cruising. I think even with Basic Instinct, we saw it before. They were protesting the filming of that film as well.
Yep.
When the film was screened, Iowa City National Organization for Women and members of other feminist organizations picketed the film as it was shown on the University of Iowa campus, as Elizabeth said, distributing leaflets against the film, condemning what they saw as a depiction of violence against women as entertainment. During the film's initial release, the activist group Women Against Violence in Pornography and Media distributed another leaflet, arguing that the distorted image of a psychotic transgender woman makes all sexual minorities appear sick and dangerous. So, again, none of this is mentioned in that 2001 interview, but there isn't a 2015 interview with De Palma. He's talking to Noah Baumbach, and on the misogyny aspect, he says, it's a struggle to be called a misogynist. He felt like he was, metaphorically defending beating his wife the way people were talking to him, and he never felt like that's what he was doing in the film. But the kind of more quote for me is, he goes, "To me, a woman in peril is more emotionally effective than Rambo in peril. It's just a simple sort of convention of the genre.
Women, scary when they're scared."
As opposed to men, because men, it's not scary when men are scared, or I guess men can't be scared.
Yeah.
But I did find this. So in June 2016, De Palma did an interview with Entertainment Weekly, and it was again about his treatment of women in his films, but they only mentioned Body Double and Dress to Kill. And for Dress to Kill, he says, "I don't know what the transgender community would think now. Obviously, I realize that it's not good for their image to be transgender and also be a psychopathic murderer, but I think that perception passes with time. We're in a different time." And then on the subject of how the film has aged since its release, he says he is proud that the film has found many fans within the LGBTQ community. As a matter of fact, last year, Out published a piece calling Dress to Kill a gay movie landmark. I looked up who wrote that article, though.
It's Armin White.
Armin White.
Of course it was.
I will say, I've read that article. I am going to be quoting from it throughout this episode, because as much as Armin White is a fucking idiot 99% of the time, I actually think the piece makes some good points.
Sometimes the worst person you know is right.
Here's the thing. He's reading it through a gay lens and not a trans lens, so I think that's how he's sidestepping some of the controversy.
Makes sense.
Well, I was really shocked because he sucks.
Yeah. Folks, if you don't know, Armin White, legitimate fucking idiot asshole.
He's not like a Rex Reed level of terrible. Like, he's not calling Melissa McCarthy a dump truck sized person in his reviews of films, but he's not much better.
Mm-mm.
Anyway, that's it. That is Dress to Kill.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so in addition to White, I'm going to be referencing Jessica Kretz's article, The Unintentional Empathy of Brian De Palma's Dress to Kill from Crooked Media. And I'll just note that Jessica Kretz is a self-identified trans woman. And then we also have Steve Erickson's Dangerous Liaisons, The Legacy of Dress to Kill at 40 from The Quietus. So we begin with some Vaseline lens cinematography and Pino Donaggio's romantic score as the camera pushes into a giant carpeted bathroom where we see Kate, played by Angie Dickinson, and she is touching herself in the shower while she stares longingly at her douchebag husband Mike, who is played by Fred Weber, as he shaves.
So, fun fact. In the original script for this film, it was not Kate that we started with in the shower. De Palma started the opening scene with a nude man, with a straight razor shaving all of the hair off of his chest. And then he starts shaving his pubic area. And then when he gets to his penis, he hacks it off.
Whoa.
And I actually looked up the screenplay because you can find it online, and it's interesting because that is something that actually plays into the narrative. You find out later on when Dr. Elliot is called by Bobby. Oh, no. Later when Dr. Elliot goes to the other doctor, Dr. Levy, he tells him that Bobby had just tried to cut off her penis, and like Dr. Elliot is shocked to hear this. And I can understand why he cut it out, because that just creates like a giant plot hole.
Yeah, but I think that'd be way too confusing. But as a visual to start off the movie, that would be very confronting in 1980.
Well, and they did shoot it. They shot it 2 or 3 different ways, and they couldn't get it to work.
Yeah.
I should note, too, there's a gay porn film from 1973 by Jack DeVoe called Drive, which is about this evil trans woman who's trying to eliminate the male sex drive. And this film, one of the first things you see in it is her cutting off a man's dick with a knife. And it's very bloody.
I'm sorry, you said this is a porn?
It's a gay porn film, yes.
Wow. That's getting me hard right now.
Oh my God. Well, I guess that, okay, so how does this change the film, right? If we're starting the film with, okay, we're having a man cut off his own penis, to this scene of Kate, because I feel like there's a lot of conversation going around, at least Twitter right now, or X or whatever, about like, oh, do we need sex in the movies? And I'm curious, playing devil's advocate, I'm going to ask y'all, what is the necessity of showing Kate nude in this scene for such an extended, lengthy period of time?
I mean, I would say why not? I mean, I will say that I am glad that they didn't include that original opening too, because I think that is one of the biggest tropes in trans cinema from the 70s and early 80s. Mm-hmm. There's always that climactic scene of the person trying to cut off their penis. The film I Want What I Want, which is, I think, one of the best trans films from actually, there are two trans films from the 70s. I Want What I Want, which is from 1973-74, and Cambio de Sexo, which is a Spanish film from 1977. Both of those feature scenes. In I Want What I Want, it's like the climactic scene, and Cambio de Sexo, it happens like midway through the film, of the character who is so overwrought with emotion for being like rejected that they cut off their penis. So the fact that Brian De Palma is like explicitly referencing this trope, I think is something that would have really dragged the film down, and I think maybe make it not age as well as it kind of has.
Yeah, it might have been more appropriate for the time, but I don't think it would work in the long run.
I mean, and this is a trope that we still have, like Lucas Stomp, his film Girl from a couple years ago, that also has a scene near the end where the trans woman at the center of it tries to cut off her penis. Mm-hmm. So that's a stupid, dangerous trope that we still have all these years later. And I'm glad that, De Palma had, perhaps it was like a ratings thing, and that's why he cut it out. But I'm glad that didn't make it into the final film.
Well, I mean, I'm curious. I mean, I feel like when we're talking about problematic aspects, like, intentionality comes into play a large part of it. Do y'all see any malicious intent on De Palma's part in, like, this transgender subplot? Or I guess plot, not subplot.
I think it's more idiocy than anything.
Yeah, it seems very misinformed to me. Yeah. But also, I mean, some of the readings that I have presented or shift the way that you might think about it that I think are interesting. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at his comments and what was happening at the time, it's probably just that he was misinformed.
Yeah.
But as to your original question, Trace, I do absolutely think that the nudity is vital here, if only because of the kind of film that we're making, which is very explicitly an erotic fucking thriller. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to show Kate in a certain mindset right from the offset. Like, we're going to learn about her, and she's very indecisive. She's afraid to voice her wants and her needs. So to see her literally, as the film opens, we're seeing her in a moment of sexual desire where she's looking at her husband. She's trying to get the sexual pleasure that he is not giving her, and she's lost in a fantasy. Like, that is telling me everything about who this character is, so that when we get to that museum, I understand why she does what she does.
Yeah, that does make sense. I will say Andrew Dickinson is really good on the 2001 making of doc, because it's not her nude body in the shower; it's her head, of course. But she says that she was sitting in the bedroom set, just like kind of like waiting to go in and do her parts, and cinematographer Ralph Bodo walks out to her and goes, "You know what we're doing in there? We're doing beaver shots."
Oh my god. Real professional set here. So as she is soaping herself, she is eventually sexually assaulted from behind by a man who is played by Robbie L. McDermott, and he covers her mouth and lifts her off the ground as she screams for Mike, who does not care or pay attention. And this turns out to be a nightmare sequence, and she is actually dreaming, but she is still being sexually assaulted because Mike is fucking her as she wakes up, and then he finishes, kisses her on the cheek, and leaves to go shower.
Oh, interesting. I didn't read this as she was having a nightmare while she was being fucked by her husband without her knowledge. I thought this was like a very slight passage of time.
I wouldn't even say it's a nightmare. It's a fantasy. She's having a fantasy.
Or maybe like because she doesn't. I mean, she didn't say anything of the sort in her therapy session. She'll get to later, but maybe it's something that she's thinking about while she's aware that she's getting fucked.
Yeah, I mean, like, whether you want to believe she's dreaming this or she's fantasizing about it, it changes it slightly. Like in my reading, if you believe that she's having a nightmare or it's a dream sequence, then her husband really does not give a shit about her, because that's not a great way to wake somebody up. Like having sex with them without their permission or their consent. But if you choose to believe the less rapey version of this, this is still incredibly unsatisfying sex for her.
Oh, sure. It makes it not a sexual assault.
Right. So after she gets up and starts her day, Kate checks in on her teenage scientist son, Peter, played, as we mentioned, by Keith Gordon, and she is frustrated when he bails on their museum plans because he stayed up all night working on a binary number machine. And I did think it was so amusing how he is basically a teenage scientist, as though this was a thing that we did in the 80s and like the early 90s. I was thinking of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and the dad from Gremlins, where it's like, oh yeah, we were in this day and age where people were just inventors and weird things like that.
I was going to say he also looks like a baby Trent Reznor, so it kind of fits.
Well, fun fact, this character is based on De Palma himself, because De Palma did make his own computer.
Yeah, I mean, whatever this thing is that Peter is trying to make, he doesn't really, he's not really able to explain it, but, you know, you get the gist that it's something that's occupying his mind. He's obviously a very bright boy, but I love that because it's 1980, this thing takes up nearly his entire fucking room.
Oh, yeah.
Technology. I love it.
I love it a little bit because, you know, we have this thing where they talk about, oh, like, you know, Napoleon invented this pastry called the Napoleon and blah, blah, blah. And so it was like, I'm going to name it the Peter. And I just love that Kate's like, all right, fine. I'll just tell Grandma you're working on your Peter.
It's an innuendo. Get it?
That's that double entendre that one critic hated so much.
Indeed. I appreciate those kinds of jokes.
Mm-hmm. I also think it really, like, oh god, endears me to Kate. Like, Kate is such a nice character. I love her, and I relate to her so much in this movie. I mean, maybe not like relate to her, but like I get it.
Well, and I think that this is also why we get initial comparisons to Psycho. It's not just because we're going to kill Kate off like 30 to 40 minutes into this movie. It's because a lot of rich character work is put into her so that we actually care when we kill her off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So she goes to therapy with Dr. Robert Elliott, played by Michael Caine, and she has very relatable issues. She isn't sure that she wants her mother to come for her surprise birthday party. She's got these wham-bang special sex sessions with Mike where she can't talk about how she's not getting any pleasure out of them. And Dr. Elliott encourages her to verbalize her anger. So she kind of misreads this as, well, I'm not feeling super desired right now, so she asks him if he would like to sleep with her, and he noticeably catches his reflection in the mirror before explaining that it's not worth jeopardizing his marriage.
And he's not married, right?
I mean, he could be, but we have no suggestion that he is.
Yeah, I feel like something Liz says to him at the very end where she's like, I think she says something of the sort, but I will say, because I feel like some people might like to criticize, like, oh, a real psychiatrist wouldn't do that, and De Palma, you know, is on the defense, of course, saying, like, I went to my psychiatrist and said, is this all kosher? But I think it also, like, ignores the fact that some psychiatrists do unethical things and say unethical things. Like, that isn't like a completely out of this world thing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so we move into the 10-minute sequence at the museum, and if you were going to accuse this film of being style over plot or substance, people would probably point to this sequence, and I would tell them to go fuck themselves. So we watch as Kate makes a grocery list. She watches the crowd. She's got a number of different people who catch her eye. I'm going to bring in White here for the first time. He says, Kate's bored gallery browsing is depicted when she stares back at an Alex Katz portrait that mirrors her own impatience. Her sexual frustration is caricatured when she observes a painting of a gorilla whose oversized, hairy, supine nakedness mocks her own suppressed animal instincts, at which point she abstractly writes in her memo pad, "Pickup turkey."
Which was... which was Dickinson's idea. She was just like, I was gonna say ad-libbing that, but ad-lib writing that.
Ad-writing?
Yeah, this scene, I mean, again, like, there's so much plot in this scene, it's just that there's no dialogue in it. But, like, it's so visually mesmerizing, and the score, I mean, the way the score builds and builds and builds towards the end. One technical aspect I love, you can't tell when you're watching, because I went back and watched it to see, but like because they're using a Steadicam for all these tracking shots, and they filmed Dickinson's part, and then they would go back and film like her viewpoint shots,
right?
But to make sure she would stay in focus, like in pace with the camera, they attached a rope to the camera that Dickinson then held to ensure she stayed the exact same distance from the camera as it moved around the museum.
It's funny, right? It's not exactly technical, and yet it is very savvy. So the reason that she is wandering around the museum is because she has locked eyes with an attractive man who we will eventually learn is named Warren Lockman. He's played by Ken Baker, and he's a very mysterious, vaguely European-looking motherfucker. Could have walked straight out of an Argento film, like, no problem. And they're just playing this sexual cat and mouse game where one of them will follow the other, and then they'll duck around a corner and disappear. And you can tell that Kate is very excited by all of this, but also she gets a little impatient. She gets almost full of despair when it seems like the guy has rejected her or moved on. And my favorite shot of this is when we get this hazy split screen when she realizes that he was wearing her glove when he touched her shoulder because she had dropped it on the floor.
Liz, do you see any like giallo elements in this particular sequence outside of the fact that it's all about a glove?
I mean, for me, it's less the giallo. This is the Hitchcock sequence. It feels like a mix of things. It feels like the museum scenes from Vertigo. It's the structure of Psycho, where you're getting to know this character for the first 30 minutes of the film.
Absolutely. So eventually we move outside of the museum. Kate has lost him by this point, and she gets really disappointed, only to discover he's waiting for her in a cab with the door open, holding the missing glove. So she gets pulled into a kiss, and we do see a mysterious hand grab the other glove that she has dropped. So that is a hint that there is voyeurism afoot, that she is maybe being stalked by someone.
Well, we see the killer in the tracking shot. So when we track from Kate looking to the glove, like, I mean, it's quick. Like, you have to like look, but yeah, you see the killer right there as the camera moves by her.
Yeah, which is funny to me because that suggests, like, I know the accusations of misogyny are founded, particularly based on De Palma's previous work. And within this film, a lot of the violence is directed at women. But this tells me that Bobby was going to go after her regardless of whether she had have slept with this man or not.
I mean, also, bless Bobby. She passes. Nobody notices her. It's great.
Right? I mean, Bobby's got a great wig, and then she's rocking those shades, and she's got the trench. So I think, she does stand out, but I think she also stands out for the right feminine reasons.
I will say, though, because I didn't know this until I was doing research for this, because I always thought it was Michael Caine in a wig during these scenes. Okay, it's not, right? It's the woman, Suzanne Clemens, who plays Detective Luce at the end of the film. She plays Bobby in all these sequences except for the climactic, like, reveal. Yeah. Do y'all think that's a bit of a cheat?
Absolutely it is.
I mean, bless them for getting this clocky woman to...
Yeah, right? I mean, she passes not... Well, she is a woman, but like she passes for Michael Caine in a wig.
This poor woman just goes home at the end of the day. She's like, people think I'm Michael Caine in a wig? God.
I do like that she actually plays the cop, too. So she's still, like, as a character in this movie. Although, does she even have any lines in that climactic scene?
I think she has something that she says to Peter.
Oh, there you go.
It's not a character. Okay, so in the cab, we pull away from the museum and we start getting some hot and heavy action. We've got this voyeuristic cab driver played by Bill Randolph who watches, and eventually Kate even comes. But of course, this is sound match-on action to a horn. And it's great.
I would like to point out that if you watch this film on Tubi like I did, this is where the first ad break is.
No. No. Come on, Tubi. Don't cock block us.
It goes directly from her coming to the ad break.
Oh, no.
Okay, actually, you know what? That is kind of genius.
But it ruins the transition.
It's kind of like when I watched Last Tango in Paris on Tubi, and the ad break was immediately after the butter scene in that.
Right. I mean, I feel like Tubi knows exactly when to hit you because you're so interested in what the film is doing. Ad break.
I really want to know how Tubi decides, because sometimes I'll watch a movie on Tubi and there's no ads, or there's one ad break in a whole movie, or there's 7 ad breaks in a whole movie. And I don't know if it's like, oh, is this movie being streamed a lot, so they put more ads on it? Like, I don't know.
Maybe.
For this taxi scene, by the way, this is like this is in New York City, so we're not in Philadelphia anymore, but like they just got in a cab, put like as much of the crew in there as they could with Dickinson and this other actor, and just drove around New York City. There were no police lines, like they were in actual traffic doing all of this.
Oh, geez. Things that you would not be able to get away with. That is renegade filmmaking. So I do want to pull White back in for this. He says, no American movie of the pre-AIDS era came so close to gay urban knowledge and feeling as Kate's open-air arousal, or her orgasmic scream in a cab mixing with the sound of city traffic, or her slightly lost sense of her surroundings post-sex.
I feel so good for her in this scene. Like, good for you, girl.
Right? It's interesting. I've always wondered if the movie, by making us interested in her ungratifying sex, like, we have to assume that the movie wants us to take pleasure in her pleasure, right? Which is, I think, why I get confused about the misogyny. Like, I don't think Kate is being punished per se. I think she's being targeted because she is an overly confident sexual woman.
I mean, the only misogyny in this film, I think, is against Bobby. Like, I think both Liz and Kate are very well drawn out, even empowering female characters.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to talk about like her getting punished for her promiscuous sex, it's her finding out afterwards that the person that she just like got fucked by has gonorrhea and syphilis.
That, I think, is the movie driving the knife in a little bit.
I think that's honestly what makes her death more upsetting to me, is like she's not like getting killed after a moment of pure bliss. She's getting killed like after this bomb has been dropped on her.
Mm-hmm. And I love, too, that it's not just one. It's not that he has an STI. It's that he has both syphilis and motherfucking gonorrhea.
I mean, luckily you can cure both of those if enough time. I mean, she found out at the right time, at least. But
not to keep talking about porn, but there's also a gay porn film from right around this time that lifts this whole like plot point. It's called Boots and Saddles. It's shot at an actual New York gay bar called Boots and Saddles, and this guy goes home with someone, has sex with them, finds out that he has VD, winds up going to a bar to like escape his troubles, and gets picked up by a neo-Nazi.
Oh my god.
Okay, wait, I'm sorry, Liz, out of curiosity, are you finding or seeking out all this porn as part of your job with AFGA, or is this just a personal hobby of yours?
I mean, this is like I've been doing research into the history of like gay adult cinema for years.
Do you ever screen them?
Yeah, all over the place.
Oh man. Ugh.
That's all Trace wanted to know.
No, I'm just thinking about all the years I lived in Austin where I was like, why wasn't I going to these?
Mm-hmm. You got to pay attention to what's happening outside of commercial, like Hollywood fare, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of interesting programming that gets done. Obviously, you need to live in a larger city because it's hard to program these kinds of things in smaller places. But yeah, I mean, there's good stuff happening.
But yeah, I mean, we're talking about how like Armin White saying that like Brian De Palma is like making this gay urban film, and here are these two gay brothers, the Amaro brothers, making this gay porno film that kind of openly parodies Dress to Kill. And I will say, even though the guy gets picked up by a guy who he later finds out is a neo-Nazi, and you know he's a neo-Nazi because he has a giant like Nazi flag hanging in his apartment.
So subtle, he does.
And the soundtrack to their BDSM scene is like a Marlene Dietrich song.
Oh god.
That's so wild. This is sounding more satirical porn than anything else.
I mean, it's campy. It's a parody. At the end of the day, he gets saved by the person who he thought had VD, but actually did not.
Oh.
It has a happy ending, so...
It's a love story, then.
Would that have happened in this movie?
Absolutely not.
There's no saving Kate, unfortunately. I do also love that she tries to leave Warren a love letter, and she, isn't happy with the first draft, and then she tries a second one, and then she finds the letter about his diagnosis, and she's just like, fuck this. Okay, I'm out of here. Bye.
It's so sad. And this guy never gets to come up, and it's so upsetting. I almost every time I watch it, I almost want him to walk out during the murder scene and just get killed as a bystander.
Yeah, no, we never see that character again.
Nope. This actually also was a very real, it is a real hotel, obviously, but where Wall Street guys would actually take their sex workers on their lunch breaks.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Seedy.
Well, no, this is classy. These are the rich ones.
Well, seedy classy then. Okay, so Kate bails upon learning this horrifying news, and she rushes onto the elevator, and that's when she realizes, fuck, she left her wedding ring back in Warren's apartment. So she tries to go back up, and we've got a bunch of elevator hijinks. In some ways, I do find this funny. There's this child who looks very judgy looking at her. Mm-hmm. The elevator's taking for fucking ever. There's almost something comedic about this, except that it ends when Bobby rushes into the elevator and starts swiping with this razor.
Well, I think it's funny, but I also think it's suspenseful, which is interesting because it's suspenseful because we want her to get back to this room to get her wedding ring and leave, not because she's in any that we are aware of.
We've been distracted by all of the other things that are occupying her.
Yeah, and granted, we get that shot of Bobby looking at her through the door and approaching the elevator. So I guess we do think that maybe something's going to happen when she gets off this elevator, but still, I'm more worried about no, girl, get your wedding ring, please.
Right. So we do see quite a bit of violence in the elevator, and it does evoke a little bit of the psycho shower scene.
Sure.
But eventually her throat is slit, and then the doors open, and this is when we are introduced to sex worker / escort Liz Blake, played by Nancy Allen, and she's there with a John, but we have a certain amount of slow-mo as Kate and Liz make eyes, and Kate starts to reach for her, and Liz is reaching back, but then she catches Bobby's reflection in the I never remember.
Concave
is it convex
mirror.
Or concave?
Oh shit! Fuck! Now I'm confused. I think it's convex. Fuck it! It's a mirror. It's an anti-theft mirror. There you go.
It's a mirror. It's a mirror in the corner of the elevator, and we can see Bobby's reflection in it. And Bobby is waiting with the razor inching towards Liz's hand. I love all of this. She ends up dropping the knife. Liz picks it up, and then the doors close.
This is actually my favorite sequence in the film. It's not even the murder part of it. It's everything with Liz. I also kind of love that, I don't know if this is, what the intention is, but we're introduced to Liz having a conversation about the stock market with her John. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's, trying to be hey, look, she's a sex worker, but, she's not
she's smart. But she's smart. She's looking forward to the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why I've seen multiple people describe this film as empathetic, which I think if you're looking at it through the trans angle, that's more difficult. But if you're looking at it through its depiction of strong sexually empowered women and the amount of character work we're putting into both Kate and Liz, I could see it.
It's funny, Roberta Findlay, her film Lurkers, which I think came out in 84, 85, 86, has the scene where these models are all getting dressed after a photo shoot, and they're talking about investment strategies, and it reminded me a lot of this scene right here.
I love that. So Liz ends up getting fingered by another woman who is either living or staying in this hotel. So she accidentally has the razor in her hand. She runs down to see if she can help Kate, but Kate is already dead. Bobby is already gone. And then the cops get involved.
So, okay, Dennis Franz, who will seemingly play a cop for the entire rest of his career. What do we think of this character?
Oh, he's a piece of shit. But purposefully so. I almost regard him more as a caricature of a police officer. And obviously some people will say, no, that's just police officers. But he seems even more ogreish than we are used to seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Does he redeem himself to y'all by the end by being like, oh, he kind of knew what was going on the whole time?
He sent an innocent woman out as bait.
I hate this character. I mean, he's an interesting character because I like watching him play off of Nancy Allen because it's just, I think it's fun to watch, but God, he is insufferable.
So before we're actually introduced to him as he's conducting interviews and so on, we do cut to Dr. Elliott's house where he checks his message, and he has one on the machine by Bobby. And in this case, I don't know about this. It says on Wikipedia that the voice of Bobby is provided by William Finley.
Oh, yeah. No, that's who it is.
I could hear that, yeah.
I'm just like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Again, a bit of a bait and switch. We didn't even have Michael Caine try to use his voice. We didn't have Clemens use her voice. So it's an odd choice to me. But yeah, it works.
It's just another cheat.
Mm-hmm. So on the message, Bobby identifies herself as a girl who was trapped inside a man's body that Dr. Elliott isn't helping to get out. So she has borrowed his razor, and some blonde bitch saw her. So she's going to go take care of that. But if Dr. Levy calls, please back her up. Just like, there's a lot of information condensed in that message, but as a first-time viewer, you wouldn't understand any of it. Which I think is interesting. Like, the movie is mostly playing fair if you're looking for the details. You know, apart from casting a completely different actress and a completely different voice actor.
But that's the thing, though. I go back and forth because, I mean, even critics at the time were like, this isn't like the whodunit aspect is the weakest part of this film. So are you a little surprised that De Palma doesn't try to, like, make it a stronger aspect? But I guess we also don't have that many characters. Because are we really supposed to believe that Bobby is someone, like, an entirely different character in this film?
I think so.
Oof.
I think that's the intention. I don't think it entirely works, though.
Yeah, I don't either, which, meh.
Yeah. So we go to the police station because Detective Marino has asked Dr. Elliott to come down. Liz is already there. Peter is already there. So we're having characters interacting. Dr. Elliott is very kind to Peter. He offers him his card and says, you know, if you need any help, because obviously I knew your mom, you can come and talk to me. And when Dr. Elliott gets called in for his interview, Peter listens in using some kind of homemade listening device.
We will be discussing something like this in a Patreon episode coming out this month.
Yes, it's a do-it-yourself stealth tech for breaking the law and sexy games.
I will say, though, it works really well because he hears every single bit of this conversation. But I do kind of feel for him, like, because Frances' character is not mincing words when it comes to Kate's her last activities. And for her son, again, imagine this was a 10-year-old kid.
No, it doesn't work. Like, I don't think you'd be able to convincingly have Peter do much of anything he does in this film.
Yeah.
So, important to know that Detective Marino does tell Dr. Elliott that Liz thinks she saw a blonde woman, which is why she's looking through mugshots, and that does not help Liz in the future because Dr. Elliott will be able to track her down. But, yeah, we also learned that Marino thinks that a weirdo from Elliott's office is probably the culprit, and that's how they met Kate, that's how they latched on to her. But Dr. Elliott says he will not help Detective Marino because it's doctor-patient confidentiality, and also I think he just doesn't like this detective because he's very rude and crude and vulgar.
He is an asshole!
If this movie gets anything right about the trans experience, it's that all cops are bad. And
yes.
It's a shared thing.
Well, I guess question 2, like, so leaving out the Bobby of it all, what do we think is Elliot as a character in this film? Because I actually think that generally, I think he's kind of the weakest aspect of it, because I guess maybe because he's not the focus, because it's the film trying to hoodwink us into, like, not realizing he's also the killer, but he's kind of one note to me.
It's very boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think it is by design because we want him to be as milquetoast as possible so that we don't suspect he could be harboring a second identity because, of course, this film is conflating DID with being trans.
Yeah.
But that's a story for later in the episode. Okay, so next up is Liz's interview, and Marino calls her a whore. He names her a suspect, but he is more interested in her client, Ted, from out of town, and wants her to track this guy down to either back up the story about the blonde or provide other details. So he gives her 48 hours to track down Ted, or else she will be booked. So there's some clear judgment about the type of work that Liz is engaging in.
Just a bit.
Yeah, just a bit.
I mean, he calls her a whore. But again, I love it. He's like, who you fucking? And she just goes, fuck you. Like, good for you, Liz. Good for you.
Yeah, these are the scenes that really establish, like, Marino's not a proper character. He comes in when we need a cop to be here. So this is all about establishing Liz as a strong-willed woman who doesn't have any issues with engaging in sex work. Like, she's not ashamed of it. She's actually quite proud of it, but she's also not sharing details with people.
Mm-mm. And she also is just going on her own investigation, because why not?
Well, and as Elizabeth said, that is very giallo, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not actually involved in this, but now I gotta solve this fucking murder.
I mean, I guess she's kind of involved because she is now being stalked by Bobby, but...
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally the plot of The Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
Yes.
The guy witnesses this murder and he can't leave the country because the cops think he's a suspect.
And in that one, you notoriously see the killer in a reflection, but it's misconstrued for, I think, a painting?
That's Deep Red.
That one's great, by the way, folks. If you have not seen it, strong recommend.
What, Crystal Plumage or Deep Red? Or both?
Both.
Oh, I mean both, but Crystal Plumage, because Elizabeth was talking about it.
Is this a bad time to say that I'm not the biggest Deep Red fan?
You know what? We're going to change it.
Just move past it. I spent $50 on that Arrow set because as a blind buy, so I paid my dues.
There we go. Or we could just cover it, and then you could justify the expense.
Write it off. Yeah.
I need to watch the North American because I watched the extended European cut, and so I've been told that I might enjoy the shorter cut more, but we'll see.
I like the longer cut. It's fun. I don't know. I think that one's fun because it is a very loose movie. It's not necessarily suspenseful,
and it's not driven by plot.
Yeah, it's not really a plot-driven movie. There's a mystery, and like the murder scenes are great, but I don't know. I think the longer version is the best version of that.
I just think if there's longer versions that the director is on board for, that's probably more copacetic with what they're trying to achieve. Like, that's probably closer to their desired vision for the film.
Right. And this is not a Deep Red specific thing. Like, I struggle with giallo a lot.
I get that.
Yeah, I think we've done Tenebrae on the podcast, and he mostly got through it.
Yeah, no, out of the few giallo that I have seen, that one's my favorite.
You should watch the American cut of Phenomena, which is called Creepers, which is like the most nonsensical thing. It's a nearly 2-hour movie that they cut down to like 78 minutes.
But see, that's the one that I feel like I would want to watch the longer cut of that.
Do you really? It's Jennifer Connelly talking to insects.
Yeah, it's the bug. It's the bug one.
And there's a chimp. It's wild.
Yeah, I need to see that. But wait, not Dracula 3D?
Oh, God. Stop. Okay, we're moving on. Okay, so Peter starts tracking the number of clients and the times that they come out of Dr. Elliott's office because he's working off of Detective Marino's theory that one of the doctor's other clients is the killer. So he's working on schematics. We get to see a little bit of Bobby observing Liz as she comes home. So we know that the killer knows where Liz lives. And then the next day, Peter returns to park his bike camera in front of Dr. Elliott's door, setting the timer to take pictures every 4 seconds.
This kid's a genius.
He really is, yeah. I mean, he's a bit pervy. He's like our uncomfortably voyeuristic teenager where you're like, oh, you're going to use that to take pictures of ladies later, aren't you?
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, he doesn't even try to cop a feel of Liz. He never tries to make a move on Liz.
Trace, he literally invites her to come home when his dad isn't there at the end of the film.
That's innocent. This is a 10-year-old kid.
Trace. Oh my God. Okay, so in a split screen, because of course it's a Brian De Palma movie, we've got Elliot listening to Bobby's message. She's left him a new one, and she's talking about stalking Liz. So we're also seeing Liz in her apartment, and she is making phone calls because she's trying to capitalize, yes, Trace, on the stock tip she got from Ted from out of town.
This scene it's a lot, because it's like sensory overload with how much is going on in this scene.
Well, and we don't know what's important. So is her stock stuff going to become important, or is it just character detail, or is it this random woman who's leaving messages that we don't really know? We assume she's the killer, but also she's just leaving messages for Dr. Elliot. So after the message ends, then Dr. Elliot begins watching this Phil Donahue interview with Nancy Hunt. So in case folks don't know, you can very quickly do a quick Google search, but she is a real life, she's labeled as a transsexual woman in the film because it's 1980, but she was an award-winning journalist who worked at the Chicago Sun-Times, and she actually ended up getting outed by a colleague. So she didn't have any desire to come out, and then she was married, and her wife was like making dresses for her and helping her with her makeup, but the wife apparently didn't want her to fully transition. But when she was outed, she did, and then she ended up getting divorced, and like it's a whole big thing. But apparently she was infamous because of all of this as being a very public trans woman figure in the media.
It's worth noting too, she wouldn't be the only major trans person in the news at the time. This is a few years after Renee Richards. Christine Jorgensen was still a public figure at the time.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring in Kretz here because I think it's important to talk about this. When we covered, Trace, what was it? Silence of the Lambs, we talked a little bit about the classification from the Mental Disorder Psychiatric Handbook. But just in case folks have forgotten, during the 1960s and 70s, clinicians used the term true transsexual, which I find deeply uncomfortable.
As opposed to false transsexual?
Basically, yes. So to be considered a true trans person, you had to have 3 characteristics according to this classification. So one, cross-gender identifications that were consistently expressed behaviorally over a period of time. So either childhood into teens, teens into adulthood, and so on. 2, minimal or no sexual arousal to cross-dressing, because they were looking to distinguish between you like to dress in another gender's outfits versus you get turned on doing that, which is more fetishistic. But of course, we're conflating cross-dressing with being trans. And then 3rd, no heterosexual interests relative to their anatomical sex. And shockingly enough, this was eventually all disproven because A, that's not how any of this works, but also a bunch of the people that they were studying to come up with these classifications revealed to be lying because they basically wanted treatment.
Oh.
That's the story of trans medicine right there.
Mm-hmm.
Something you still have to do, basically.
God. Yeah. I don't know. Have we made any ground?
Well, I was going to say it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it seems more like it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back nowadays, especially given the legal system in the United States.
Yeah. I will say, given that classification that Kretz identifies, though, the fact that Nancy Hunt does make that joke, oh, I've always been devoutly heterosexual, it does make me laugh extra hard.
Why?
Because one of the classifications was no heterosexual interest relative to their anatomical sex.
The irony. I got it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's our split screen. As you said, Trace, it's a bit of information overload, and then we move on. So Liz goes to meet up with this client because she's trying to make some extra coin to make this investment happen. And then when she comes out, she notices she is being followed. So she uses her sexual wiles to try to get a cab driver to lose Bobby. And then she ends up having to run into the subway. And we get some good old racist shit going on here.
Before we get to your racist punks, I actually really wanted the movie with Liz and this cab driver going off on their own adventures because I like their chemistry.
It's a romantic comedy.
Yes.
This guy's in love with her, and she's like, yeah, we'll have a date later. Bye. They do have good chemistry, though.
Oh yeah, and again, he helps her out. I mean, of course, it's at this point, it's the policewoman who he opens the door on and knocks her out on the ground. But nevertheless, yeah, I think he's cute.
Sure.
So these thugs.
Yeah, we call them punks in this movie, but basically Liz gets harassed by a group of black men on the subway platform, and she ends up jumping onto a subway car where she tries to get a police officer who is also black to listen to her, and he does not either. This is, I feel like, just some weird white folk uncomfortable with the fact that other marginalized people live in a city, so I think this is one of the elements that has also aged very badly in the film.
Yeah.
I will say, however, to highlight a silver lining part of this film, I do love the almost comedic jokiness of Liz looking out one door and missing the black punks getting in on one side, and then looking the other way and missing Bobby getting in.
I will say no, because you pinged me to the racism of this in a message last night. I was kind of like, oh, how is it racist because they're punks? And me, basic white ass, going completely over my head. Again, it's a thing where it's like, what, is there not a single white person they could have cast in here to make it not just a bunch of black people? But yeah.
I wouldn't have been quite as bothered if we had more black people in this film in general, sure. But the only other time we see a black person outside of this sequence is the woman who tries to finger Liz for the crime when she sees Kate's body.
And she's like a housekeeper, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and we could maybe say it's a class critique or something like that, but I just think it's bad representation. Okay, so she ends up getting away from these people, but she runs right into Bobby's arms, and the only reason she is not killed here is because Peter saves her with yet another homemade piece of tech, in this case, some homemade pepper spray.
This is fun. Actually, I do like this though, because she almost gets it.
Yes.
It is, I think this is also one of the better suspenseful set pieces in the film.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. De Palma's politics, gender specifically, are dicey, but the man really knows how to shoot a fucking movie. Mm-hmm. So Peter and Liz have now been introduced. She takes him back to her place, and this is where Peter formulates this plan. So he thinks that the killer is one of Dr. Elliot's patients. He knows how often they come out, so all they have to do is figure out which of the patients it is and then identify them using Dr. Elliot's appointment book.
This is so Scooby-Doo to me. I love it.
It's very Scooby-Doo. Okay, so the next day, Liz visits Detective Marino's office, and he wants to know, well, you said you were attacked on the subway. Can anyone back you up? But Peter has basically asked to be left out of this, so she refuses to name him. So Marino just blackmails her again. He's basically getting her to do everything. He wants her to break into Dr. Elliot's office, or else he will arrest her.
I hope you make a better hooker than you make a detective.
I mean, she's a better hooker and a better detective than he is.
Yep, a little bit.
So we then get a scene at Metropolitan Psychiatric Hospital as Dr. Elliot confronts Bobby's new psychiatrist, Dr. Levy, who is played by David Margulies. And this is an interesting scene when you know what's going to happen the first time. Again, you may not really understand the context or why Dr. Levy is reacting the way he is, but he's basically trying to get Dr. Elliot to come back to his office with him, and Dr. Elliot is not interested in doing that.
Yeah, this... I mean, literally... Because we get the explanation at the end where, Marino's like, well, I was on a date with my wife or whatever, so I didn't get the call till later, and blah, blah, blah. Call any police officer!
Mm-hmm. Yeah, phones exist in this world. It's just because you didn't have a cell phone doesn't mean you were out of touch. It kind of falls apart for me here because I'm just like, dude, and maybe it's because Dr. Levy doesn't want to fracture Elliot / Bobby's psyche, so he's like, okay, let's do this gently. But I'm like, dude, you just heard someone basically unknowingly confess to murder. Let's get a move on this. Mm-hmm. Or you've seen two completely different facets of a person's personality. And they don't, like, the man side of it, quote unquote, does not acknowledge the female side of it, quote unquote.
Oof.
Like, you know that this person is a danger to themselves and others. You have a professional responsibility.
Yeah.
But he does not. So that's fine. Let's move on. So Peter reviews his Super 8 film, and we establish, okay, there's Bobby. That's the woman that attacked you on the subway, and she was coming out of Dr. Elliot's last. So now all we have to do is get inside. And of course, folks, there is a storm a brewing.
Literally and figuratively.
So Liz goes to the doctor's office and she's pretending she's a patient. She talks about this dirty dream that she has. She also opens the blinds so that Peter can keep a lookout with binoculars outside. She then moves on to try to seduce Dr. Elliot. She strips down to some very good lingerie, and then she questions the state of his marriage.
I have never worn like sexy lingerie. I mean, the closest I've come to wearing something like this is like a jock strap, which I feel like is pretty basic. But I wanted to wear this outfit.
I will say, Trace, one of my favorite things over the last 6 months to a year is you talking about all of the women's robes that you want to wear, the lingerie. I really feel like you're getting in touch with your feminine side.
Honestly, I was going to say if I could wear a dress. Obviously, I can wear a dress.
Trace, is this the podcast where your egg finally cracks? Is having a trans person on the podcast what gets you to transition?
You got me. No, but seriously, I mean, because here's the thing. I am not a shopper. I hate trying on clothes, but I think I would love shopping for dresses.
Ooh.
I just think it'd be fun. And also, they always look so comfortable. But maybe I'm wrong.
Elizabeth is like, no, we'll talk later.
Nevertheless, Liz is like, all right, I gotta go shit, so wait for me and undress while I go do this.
She says powder her nose, thank you.
That's code for I gotta take a shit.
No, it isn't. As Pulp Fiction taught us, that's code for doing coke.
But she actually, also, surprisingly, she doesn't do any drugs in this movie. So she's like, I don't know, will we call her like the hooker with the heart of gold trope? Is that what this is?
Yeah, basically. She hangs out with a teenage boy.
Sure.
This is basically all the right moves. So anyway, the suggestion that she is either taking a shit or doing cocaine is actually a ruse. She wants to look at the appointment book, which is what she does. And meanwhile, Peter is watching as Dr. Elliot. He once again catches his reflection in the mirror because, of course, he's seen her in the lingerie, so he's getting aroused, and the score is kicking in, and all of a sudden, Dr. Elliot disappears, and Bobby makes an appearance.
This is all very fun.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is probably the height of the erotic thriller-ness of this film. Like, between this and Kate's elevator death sequence, this is classic for me. It's all about voyeurism. It's putting the camera in the position of the audience so that we are also complicit in the violence. It's erotic, it's sexually charged, but it's also deadly. Like, getting turned on will literally kill you in this movie.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we have Michael Caine wearing his wig and lipstick.
Yeah, so before he can attack Liz, he is shot by Detective Luce, who, as we have mentioned, has been played by Susanna Clem. And, she was behind Peter the whole time. So apparently Liz was always safe? Question mark.
Man.
I mean, good thing that Detective Luce was also a crack shot, because she could have easily hit either Liz or Peter. All this to say, Bobby is shockingly revealed to be Dr. Elliot. So then we move to Detective Marino's office, and this is where he admits that, yes, he did in fact use Liz as bait. And then Dr. Levy, who is also there, explains, here we go, folks. Dr. Elliot is a transsexual with both male and female sides. Incorrect. So apparently Dr. Elliot, who is the man side, would not accept the desires of Bobby, who is the female side. Incorrect. To transition to the point that Elliot blocked it when Bobby wanted to do that. So the explicit explanation is, yes, it was like Bobby's red alert. Elliot's penis became erect and Bobby took control, trying to kill anyone that made Elliot masculinely sexual.
Forgive my ignorance on this. Like, was gender identity a phrase that existed back then?
Probably not in the way that we constructed, if it was.
I don't know. I mean, I guess, Liz, because I know you love this movie, but what goes through your mind when you hear this explanation for what's going on in this scene?
I mean, I think it's fascinating as like a snapshot of what, you know, what thoughts about trans people were at the time, and also, you know, Brian De Palma's own like anxieties over, you know, the fears of like going home with a trans woman or something like that. I will say too, one of my favorite pieces of writing about this film is an article that the trans film critics Caden Mark Gardner and Willow Caitlin McClay did for their Body Talk for their Body Talk series.
Damn it, I meant to look that up. Yes, because I love their pieces. Yeah.
So I will say, like, if you want like a really thorough look at this film through like an actual trans lens, I would highly recommend reading their writing about it. I mean, this film it gets a whole lot wrong, but I don't think it's necessarily trying to make any sort of a statement. It's using this real thing as basically as a gimmick and a plot device to basically hang this thriller narrative around. So like, it doesn't hold up. It's not great, but at the same time, I just like, who cares? Also, I think my issue is that, you know, Bobby is hardly a character. I wish.
Right.
Yeah.
I love trans villains, and I wish this film was actually more about that character than it was about. As much as I love Nancy Allen and Keith Gordon, they're fun together. I wish that she was part of this too. I mean, that's why I like Sleepaway Camp. I mean, my favorite. I think one of my favorite trans horror films is Homicidal, and that's got like an incredible trans villain who is basically on screen almost the entire movie and is incredible. Whereas in this one, Bobby is always just kind of a flash. It's like a shadow that you see throughout.
Yeah, she's not a character.
Well, but that's the whodunit aspect, right? And here's the thing, because I didn't realize this. Like, by the time this scene ends, we're just shy of 90 minutes on this runtime. And I was like, there's 15 more minutes in this movie? Like, I had no idea. Rather than having what these last two scenes are, which I honestly don't think are completely necessary to the film, an alternate version, like an alternate universe version of this movie, could be like, you remove the whodunit aspect and have the plot split between the Liz and Keith Gordon stuff, and then also maybe Elliot wrestling with his Bobby side, just out in the open, like lose that whodunit aspect. But I don't know, but then, does that become a less interesting film because of that?
The interesting thing about that is that that's actually the structure of Cruising the novel, and that was the original structure of Cruising the movie before William Friedkin like drastically changed it during editing. Because in the original novel for Cruising, the chapters alternate between the killer's point of view and the detective who's trying to track the killer down. And in Cruising, the film, as it was shot, you would be introduced to the killer almost at the very beginning of the movie, and you would cut between Al Pacino and the killer, and have all these different scenes of like the killer, like going about his day, like day to day. So that what you're saying, like, basically would have been what Cruising was originally meant to be.
See, that would have been so fascinating. I can understand that if you were putting up a bunch of money to make a feature film and then realizing you need to sell it, a whodunit is much easier to market out to an audience. But in terms of telling a fascinating story and actually making your villain a proper character with motivations, with maybe backstory, but maybe not, maybe just so that the audience can actually understand this person, that would work so much better. But
I'm sorry, I'm refreshing my memory because I know it's ambiguous in Cruising as to whether or not Pacino is the killer or not, but is that less ambiguous in the book? Like, the cop is not the killer, or the cop is the killer in Cruising?
So the thing that's interesting about the book is that the kind of the narrative is a little different, because in the film, Pacino is the only decoy who's like set on this assignment. In the book, he is like one of like 6 or 7 cops that are like sent on this case. And like in the book, he has this like showdown near the end of the, like, what is like the final showdown in the movie, where he like picks up the guy in the park and kills him. In the book, he finds out, I killed one of the other decoys. I didn't kill the killer. I killed another cop. and then he covers it up to make it look like the killer killed this cop. The killer is actually taken down at a bathhouse where he like kills a bunch of gay men, and then they kind of rise up and take him down.
Oh my god, that's knife plus heart.
Yeah, basically, yeah. It literally is, yeah.
Oh man! Well, Cruising the book is available on Kindle for $3.99, but I cannot. There's no physical copy, but I'm sure I can find it.
Yeah, I think it's been out of print for a while, but it's good that they've got an electronic copy because I've been wanting to read that for ages.
Yeah, I might honestly pick it up too.
I don't know if it's good, but it's a really interesting counterpoint to the film.
Book to film comparison, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That being said, though, there was a novelization of Dressed to Kill, and I would be interested also to read that.
Ooh, I wonder if you get Bobby.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, because I think that a lot of these, I haven't read a ton of them, to be honest, but I always feel from people who like want to read the novelization of Halloween 4 that they get like so many extra scenes and footage and characters in this novelization. Right. So I do wonder, if the novelization of this, well, but it would have to still present it as a whodunit, though, wouldn't it?
I don't know.
I don't know. You would think. I mean, sometimes novelizations are based on original or other drafts of shooting scripts as well. So.
Oh yeah. Well, hey, listeners, if you've read the novelization of Dressed to Kill, let us know.
Indeed. Yeah. Good luck tracking it down.
Yeah.
So, coming back to this explanation that Dr. Levy presents, I do want to bring back Kreitz one more time. So this is the trans critic who feels that the film is more empathetic than you might realize. And this is why. So she says, an argument can be made that Dr. Elliot would be familiar with the gatekeeping guidelines about how we define trans at the time. And he would have therefore found it impossible that he could be trans. So most of his professional colleagues would have believed this, and that would have caused him to try to squash these desires. So Dr. Elliot represents the psychiatric field's gatekeeping of trans people, which is what you said, Elizabeth, for not fitting a very narrow definition, which came from the doctor's own biases over what makes someone a man or a woman. And then later on, she says, without meaning to, De Palma has crafted a story that actually tells us important things about the way trans people were treated in the late 1970s. Again, I think you already said that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I do think that's an interesting counterpoint, right? Like, instead of doing this bullshit, oh, he's got a male side and a female side, it's like, no, Elliot recognizes that he wants to be Bobby, that he is a trans woman, that she is a trans woman, but can't process it based on the field that she is working in. So as a result, she has to impose this gender division and say, like, no, I can't ever succumb to that. And if I do, it has to become murderous.
I mean, the thing is with this film is, I mean, I think the thing that is very Hitchcockian about this film is that if you do think about it for more than a second, it just doesn't make any sense.
Oh, it falls apart spectacularly.
Because, I mean, what does Dr. Levy say? That, like, this was the first time he ever saw Bobby in, like, boy mode. So it's like, you know, did Dr. Elliot know who Bobby actually was? Did Dr. Elliot know Bobby was her? Does it make any sense at all?
Huh.
Even, like, how often was Dr. Elliot putting on the Bobby guise to become her true self? But, you know, hypothetically, then she would have whole hours where she was absent from the office, that she was meeting with Dr. Levy when she was plotting out these murders. So,
well, and I guess, like, because like, how does Elliot know that Levy was Bobby's psychiatrist? But maybe Bobby was just leaving voicemails on Elliot's phone saying, okay, here's my information. I mean, here's my information.
One thing that's interesting in the original screenplay is that, like, as the final, like, the office scene is kind of unfolding, the kid has this flashback when he realizes, you know, he flashes back to, like, his Super 8 recording, and he realizes, oh, Dr. Elliot came in and never left, but Bobby never went in but came out.
Oh,
and then,
right.
and then that's when he's, like, grabbed from behind by who he thinks, who we're supposed to think is Bobby, but it's actually the cop.
Right. That's kind of a fun way to figure it out.
That's the very shallow thing where, like, he was looking at this the wrong way, and then, oh, he finally got it.
Bam.
Right.
Okay, so the mystery has been revealed. Dr. Elliot is in custody, so Liz asks what will happen to them, and we learn that there is a medical procedure for transitioning. So Liz hears about it from Dr. Levy, and then she consequently tells it to Peter in a very public restaurant as a very interested older lady listens in at another table.
This is fucking hysterical. I love this so much. Okay, I'm of two minds, because I think, Joe, you mentioned in the leaflet, they mentioned how this is meant to be funny, but it's like, it's funny because of this woman's reactions, not because of what Liz is saying and describing the process.
Yeah, I mean, what Liz is talking about is actually the process, right? Like, it's very anatomical. It's got hormones. We're doing penectomy, castration, plastic surgery, vaginoplasty. These are all accurate things. It's just the circumstances in which we're seeing it are humorous because this woman is so interested and kind of aghast.
Just, I don't think this woman speaks. She doesn't have a spoken line in this movie, but just her reactions are so funny.
It's funny, too. I also looked in the screenplay for that scene. Like, none of that about, like, the woman having the reaction is in it.
Oh, really?
It is very cut and dry. They're sitting in a coffee house, and she is just describing the procedure. There's nothing about, the other people are shocked or any of that.
That's amazing.
I mean, I think the other interesting thing that is very 1980s about this is, well, the medical procedures that Liz is talking about are like, yeah, okay, that's what happens. It also ascribes the desire for all trans women to want to get rid of their penises and undergo transition, right? Which is not always true. Like, I think it's another source of misinformation that it's like, oh, well, if you're a trans woman, that means you want to cut off your dick. So that's a weird, amusing scene in this film. And then Liz takes a little too much pleasure in talking about how she's going to be the star witness if Dr. Elliot ever does stand trial. But this is when Peter says, oh, you should come home with me because my dad's not home.
I still maintain it's very innocent.
Yes, because he's 10 years old, right, Trace?
Yes, absolutely. He's fine. He's fine.
He's fine. He's fine. So we cut to Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital. This is where Dr. Elliot has been put under care. And then we see them strangle a nurse who is played by Annika Di Lorenzo, proceed to undress her. We see dozens of patients watching from the floor above. It's very like Son of a Thousand Maniacs, Freddy, Dream Child.
This honestly, and maybe tell me if y'all disagree, this stylistically like looks different than the rest of the movie for me.
It is. I mean, it's not. We don't really have any signifiers that this is just a dream or a nightmare, but it's telling you non-verbally, I guess.
Well, I guess in my mind, I was only thinking that the next scene was the nightmare portion and not this scene. But I guess they both are. So we end this movie with a 15-minute dream sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, goddamn. Yeah.
Your favorite, Trace. We just talked about this on Patreon. You love a nightmare sequence.
I mean, look, like the movie, like, honestly, if the movie ends under the 90-minute mark, I'm like, okay, kind of whatever. But this does seem like it should be a longer movie. I truthfully forgot this is how it ended.
I only remember it because this is the piece that stuck out most to me on my first watch. Like, obviously, you remember all of the voyeurism stuff and the murders. But then you're right, Tris, this is so striking. You know, it looks somewhere between like a cross between Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys and some kind of weird dystopian vibe thing. It does feel like a completely different movie, and that's why it always stood out to me visually.
Are any of these patients masturbating?
That might be.
I don't know. I don't remember if they were, but I feel like in my mind.
Joyce is like, I paused. I tried to zoom in. I couldn't.
Is this your version of the Mandela effect?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just asking, did anyone else masturbate during this sequence? No? Yes. So anyway, yes, this nurse is stripped and we see Bobby put on the clothes, and then we cut to Liz as she is now seductively washing herself in the shower. She's using the handheld function of the faucet, and then we see Bobby come to the door and she leaves her shoes there to lure Liz out, and then her throat is slit. But of course, it's a fake out. We've got the great score back, and Peter is comforting her, and everything is presumably okay. I mean, I think Liz has PTSD. She should probably go see someone about that.
I think, to me, the other thing that bothers me about this is that, like, you know, having a Nancy, I was about to say Amy Irving, having Nancy Allen wake up like this, it's just like Amy Irving and Carrie. Like, forget the fact that we're getting, like, the one final scare to match Carrie, but it's the same fucking thing where we have this big-haired woman wake up in bed and just start screaming.
Well, it's the same fucking director, too.
I know! It makes it worse!
It's like, De Palma, you just did this 2 years ago, baby.
4 years ago, but yes!
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is... I often feel like films took the wrong lesson from Carrie, and a bunch of horror films consequently felt like they needed to end with a big last-minute jump scare, and most of them don't work. And this one, I think, works better because the sequence is so extended. You almost forget.
Well, and I will say, like, the reveal of, like, oh, it's just the shoes, and then she closes the mirror. I think it's shot very, very well. And it's not even like what I would call a jump scare in the same way that Carrie was. But yeah, I guess also coupled with DiNaggio's score, right? Like, it's all very familiar. It feels like we literally just did this.
But it's good.
Sure.
Well, maybe I'll give the last word to Armin White then. So he says, Dressed to Kill remains undeniable fascination, especially for LGBTQ culture. It doesn't shake off Puritan culture's sexual fear, but its boldness earns appreciation as a classic of the pre-AIDS era. Because really, this is, you know, hey, you can have great sex, but also it might kill you. Which is kind of the defining hallmark of an erotic thriller.
Sure. Well, I guess, yeah, something we haven't super focused on, I guess, is this classification as an erotic thriller? Because, well, I don't know why, but I'm just curious. So, yeah, like,
it just is. Yes, it is.
In the pantheon of erotic thrillers, where does this fit for you?
Ooh, in the pantheon? I would probably divide it by decade or period, but this is an early example for me. You know, I think in the same way that we look at Psycho as a bit of a proto-slasher, to me, this is a bit of a proto-erotic thriller because it's got a lot of the hallmarks that people like Adrian Lyne and Paul Verhoeven will use. And Trace will talk about this more on that Patreon episode. But I think this is a good entry point into that subgenre. Mm-hmm. Except for the fact that we also have to deal with all of this bullshit transphobia stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all right, everyone. Well, that has been Dressed to Kill. And Liz, as the guest of honor, what are your final thoughts on Dressed to Kill?
I mean, I think my final thoughts for this movie is that Brian De Palma showed his whole ass. And that as like a trans horror movie, it is terrible. But at the same time, I think it's an incredible thriller and it's fun. And I personally am excited to show it in Austin in October as part of Village of the Damned, New York, 1980, with the 3 other insane, bizarre, queer New York movies from that year.
Again, I would love to see this on the big screen. So everyone, if you live in Austin, go see this shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head with that. One of the things that's so good about the film is how well it's shot. You know, these performances are great. And it's a bit unfortunate that we have to acknowledge that the film is not just problematic, but that it probably actively hurt people from our community, and that really sucks. But if you can also, I guess, gently put that to the side, you can acknowledge that it is doing a lot of things really well. And I feel like in some regards, that's a bit of a hallmark of a lot of queer horror films, right? We say, I can appreciate the good things that this text does while also acknowledging it is hugely problematic and it does some really shitty things.
Look, how many of this type of conversation have we had, you know? And while it takes a lot for me to get offended, I'm not offended by this movie, even though I do find parts of it offensive. But I just feel like that makes for more interesting conversations, you know? I mean, yes, like, is it wrong? Yes. Would Gen Z probably cancel this movie? Yes. But I just find it so, as Liz said, this is just a masterclass in filmmaking, I think. I did downgrade this a little bit because while I do think that like De Palma is at the top of his game in directing here, I don't think his screenplay completely matches that skill. But that being said, though, I mean, I love Andrew Dickinson in this. I love Nancy Allen in this. I wish Michael Caine got a bit more to do, although I understand why he doesn't. But yeah, no, classic. Love it. Love this movie.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, before we announce what we're covering next week, Elizabeth, first of all, thank you so much for coming on to discuss this with us. But let everyone know, where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at SchlockValue. Also on Instagram as Ask Anybody, although that account's been on kind of a little bit of a brief pause as I get ready to move to New York in a few months, actually.
Oh.
But also, I work at the American Genre Film Archive. We have new Blu-ray releases out almost every month. We're constantly putting incredible genre films into theaters. So come out to our screenings of our titles from our library and buy our home video releases and support us.
Yes.
Amazing.
Physical media, everyone. It exists. Buy it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers. Shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered. Go to our YouTube channel to check out our interviews with various horror filmmakers, and tune in once a month to hear about our most anticipated horror films for that month. If you want to chat with other listeners, please join our Facebook Horror Queers group. And if you have a moment, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. If you subscribe today, you'll get about 260 hours of Patreon content, including this month's new episodes on Shudder's Birth/Rebirth, or Birth Rebirth? Birth Rebirth.
Birth Rebirth, yeah.
Haunting in Venice, the next installment in Kenneth Branagh's Hercule Poirot series, The Nun 2, as well as two audio commentaries. One on Underworld to celebrate its 20th anniversary, and one on Saw 2 to coincide with the release of Saw 10, or Saw X, however you want to call it. Oh, shit. Also,
I was going to say, you also missed a mini-sode.
Not a mini-sode, a full-length episode, because we will also, to tie in with this month's theme of erotic thrillers, we will have an episode on 2021's The Voyeurs, the Sydney Sweeney Justice Smith movie.
It's fun. It's a good time.
First time watch for me. I enjoyed it, but if you want to hear more about that, go give us money.
There we go.
Joe, we're going way more modern this next week. What are we discussing?
Yes, Erotic Thriller Month rolls on, but we're going contemporary, we're getting hella stylish, and we're going to be talking about brotherfuckers.
Yes!
So we are talking about A Simple Favor.
This movie was one of the biggest surprises of that year it came out for me. This movie fucking rocks. I love it so much.
Interesting. Okay, I like it. I don't love it. I find it loses a lot in the back half. But I'm excited to have the convo.
You know me. You have a hot, pretty girl saying fuck a lot and saying nasty things. It's like an idiot 5 stars. All right, everyone. Well, until next week, we can cross out Dressed to Kill.
Indeed. And cross out Horror Queers.
Atlas Avenue, a long stretch of road that encompasses everything the city of Kenneth Heights has to offer. Neon lights, traffic, crime, the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and the craziest of characters. My office was above it all. My name is James Locke, and I'm a PI.
Hello, Mr. J. How the hell you doing today?
Good, Edith. Nearly every year I have a new case. New people to meet, new clues to discover, and new problems to solve. But I do it the old-fashioned way. No technology. Nothing post-1950. Hell, I don't even listen to podcasts, but you should. Atlas Avenue Beat is a spoof of the film noir genre with goofy characters, tons of wordplay, and non-stop raunchy humor. There's also 3 whole seasons out right now with more on the way. Just search for Atlas Avenue Beat wherever you listen to podcasts or visit us online at bloody.fm.